Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Hey, it's Paul once again with another episode of Love and Abuse, and I want to remind you that all information on the show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being. Received a message that I wanted to read on the air. I told the person that I was going to read this to everyone that might be listening, because I think it's helpful when you hear someone else's challenge that you can perhaps relate to it at some level in some way. And that's why I read some of these messages on the air, is that you might have a similar challenge going on, and we can probably find a way to help you understand it, maybe get through it, or maybe learn the truth about it, that there is no way through it. Sometimes there isn't. This may be one of those. I haven't really fully realized a response yet, but I'm going to read you the message, or at least parts of it, and we'll see where we go with it. I had a man write to me and he says, as I explore the question of whether my spouse is emotionally abusive, I keep getting tripped up by her counters to what feels like everything I state. It's actually very hard to counter with logic because that very logic then seems to be used against me. When we exchange texts, it's so much easier to see the controlling and hurtful way she speaks to me. Let me give you a concrete example. When I leave in the morning, she is usually still somewhat sleeping. I give her a kiss and I tell her I love her and sometimes even wish her a good day. She doesn't respond or acknowledge me at all. But if I'm upset with her and on a very rare occasion I don't say I love you or even kiss her, she would be fast to text me telling me that I was being spiteful, hurtful, or some other related comment by not giving her love. What I conclude from this is that she is in fact alert enough to notice whether I do or don't give her love, but not interested in reciprocating or even responding later, or she'll even respond later when she is awake. This then becomes a fight about whether I love her and if I'm committed to the marriage, and all kinds of accusations that put me on the defense. At this point, I'm flustered, frustrated, and not wanting to engage with her, which, if I acted on, would fuel the fight more. My question is, where can I find resources beyond the podcast of language to use that will help me stay on point, acknowledge what I'm feeling, and then act out of my values? Okay, so this person sent me a quick follow-up, but I'm not going to read that follow-up yet because I want to comment on a couple things here. The first is that when she isn't acknowledging him when he's going off to work or anything like that, that could be something that we all go through. So here's someone that's experiencing something that any one of us, whether we're in an emotionally abusive relationship or not, could go through. Our partner is upset with us and they don't want to say I love you. They don't want to say goodbye. And we're doing our best to say goodbye and say I love you and kiss them, and they don't reciprocate. So I'm assuming that happens more often. And there's a pattern of that happening, and which is why he wrote to me. And I'm highlighting that because this is one of those components of emotional abuse that we might look at a normal relationship and say something like, everyone goes through that. You know, everyone goes through that at some point. And this is where we differentiate between emotional abuse and a regular relationship challenge or a day of difficulty in a regular relationship. It can happen in a regular relationship every now and then. It happens in an emotionally abusive relationship continually and over again. It's a pattern. And so one of the points of information that I want to highlight today is that when there are patterns of behavior that feel hurtful, that when you walk away from them, you feel hurt or you feel bad or especially bad about yourself, then you might be experiencing more of an emotionally abusive behavior than a normal relationship challenge. So this is helpful for you to understand if you haven't learned what emotional abuse is or what it consists of. It's all about patterns. It's all about repetition. And it's always about feeling some sort of negativity after an interaction of some sort. And if that happens over and over and over again, then you have a pattern that you can look at. I'm not saying that it's always emotional abuse, but it's part of a bigger picture of what might be happening. So I wanted to say that. And another thing I wanted to mention about this email is I actually wrote back to him and I asked him, what was your mean score? You know, if you hear the end of the show, it talks about the mean workbook. And the mean workbook has an assessment of 200 checkboxes. And when you fill it out, it gives you a score. And once you have the score, you can read what your score means. And so you can have up to a score of 200. And so he sent me back a score of 128, which is right at the beginning of the highest level of manipulation, because there are 4 levels of manipulation that I define in the workbook: class A, B, C, and D. And class D manipulation, I think it starts at 122, and then it goes up to 200. Anything in a class D level of manipulation where you've checked off enough boxes that are the signs that make up these patterns that give you a score. And, you know, the boxes, there's, like I said, 200 of them. And they're anything from, I never seem to meet my partner's expectations, or we have really good times and really bad times, but there seems to be no in between. And there's a bunch. I won't read them all, but things like my partner always bullies me. My partner agrees that they are toxic for me, but still doesn't leave me alone. That may not be in his case, but all these check boxes that you can check that really identify what's going on in your relationship to help you pinpoint what's happening. And what he did was he had a score of 128. So he checked off 128 boxes. And I'm just going to read you right out of the book what it means to have a score of 128, which is considered, the way I define it, a class D manipulation. And this is, like I said, straight out of the workbook. It says any score above 121 is manipulation and emotional abuse at its worst. At this point, you very likely feel like a shell of your former self. Not only have you lost trust in yourself, but you may not even trust anyone else. You may fear going to counseling because you know your partner will find a way to manipulate them too. They have the ability to do this with counselors who have not had a lot of experience with emotionally abusive people. Every conversation you have with your partner about relationship issues always turn out to be your fault, your responsibility, and up to you to fix. They don't take any responsibility because they know that they are right and you are wrong. Even when you have evidence that they are wrong, they will shame or guilt you into taking the blame for the problem. A manipulative partner at this level is so entrenched in their ways that it's nearly impossible for them to listen to reason or see the facts. You can have video evidence of them doing a bad deed, which they may even admit to, but they will almost always make you the cause for that deed at some level. Whatever you do is wrong unless it's what they tell you to do. And even then, they will probably still find a way to make you feel bad about your behavior anyway. Unfortunately, there's probably nothing you can do to change your partner's behavior at this point. Anytime you attempt to change their mind or convince them that their behavior is wrong, bad, or incorrect, you will be put in your place through exquisite tactics implemented through the words and actions of a master manipulator. At this level, they are so crafty and adept at controlling you that your chances of having a productive conversation with them is nearly non-existent. They are highly skilled at making you feel bad about yourself. Only full submission to their control is what they want from you. And it goes on a little bit longer. I'm not going to read the rest, but the reason I read this is because, if you relate, this can be helpful information, but it's not very happy information. It's not good news, because basically what I'm saying here is you can't change them. When they are at this level of this control and manipulation, and you are in the full depths of emotional abuse, you can't change them, and they won't change. Now, am I right? Can an emotional abuser change? Absolutely. But it's better for you to believe they can't change so that you don't rely on hope and wait for them to change. Because, I tell the story of my mom. She waited for my stepfather to change for over 40 years. And you can wait that long if that's what you want to do, but I don't recommend it because it's not a happy life. It's not good for you. It's not healthy to wait that long and be under so much stress and be suffering at the words and actions of a master manipulator / emotional abuser. So you have to be really careful when the abuse is that bad, because you're not going to win. I know that might not be your intention. You don't have to go out and win or lose, but whenever you try to convince someone that they're doing something wrong or that they're disrespecting you or that they're hurting you, and they're at this level of emotional abuse, they're not going to care and they're not going to back down. All they care about is serving themselves. And so the person who wrote to me, this person cares very much about serving themselves, and care is the wrong word. They're just set on serving themselves and not serving you. It doesn't matter, unfortunately, what you want. It's all about them. I'm not saying she's a narcissist. She could be. Narcissism is usually, it's all about them. In order to determine if she's a narcissist, you have to have it professionally diagnosed. But my simple trick is, are they selfish and do they have no empathy? That's the quick and dirty for me. And there's, of course, more to that that's very simplified. Are they selfish? Is it all about them? And do they have empathy? You can test empathy using the questions I've talked about before, which is, do you realize that when you do or say that, it hurts me? And if they say no, that doesn't mean they're not empathetic. It just means maybe they don't know. Maybe this is the time they're learning. If they say yes, then they don't care. Because if they realize they were hurting you and they still do it, they don't care. So again, they may have some level of caring way deep down inside, or maybe you saw it or felt it at one time. But right now, they don't care. So you have to be really careful with people who don't care, because you don't mean much to that person. You will suffer at their hands. You will find no happiness there. This isn't the feel-good episode. I'm sorry. It's not. This is the reality check episode. This is when you look at what you have and you realize this isn't going to change. This person doesn't care about me, and everything I do is wrong, and everything I should do should be for them. And even when I do that, it's not enough. So this is an important thing to remember. And I'm going to speak specifically to the person who wrote the email, or anyone that can relate to this. When you say that she doesn't reciprocate, I wrote back and said, what's your mean score? Because if your mean score was low, if you said it's about a 40, there's something there. There may be emotional abuse. There may not be. There may be just typical difficult relationship issues. If you said that, then I would have had a totally different answer for you. My answer would have been, okay, this is something you can look at. This is something you can talk about. This is a relationship challenge that can be addressed. But with a mean score of 128, you are up there. You are at the top tier. And what that means is you've checked a lot of boxes off. You have listed so many components of emotional abuse and manipulation and control that what you're dealing with is a level you probably cannot handle. And you know this because you're writing to me and you're asking me these questions. This is something I need help with. And yes, you definitely need help here. Because if you stay in this situation, I'm not saying that you should leave, but I'm saying that if you stay in this situation, you're going to need help. You're going to need to understand how to respond. The problem is, no matter how you respond, you'll get those counters, like you said. Anything you say is countered and then used against you. Maybe not then, but maybe later. If you give her a kiss and say, I love you, and then you leave, she has her needs filled. But if you decide, I'm not going to give her a kiss this time, and I'm not going to say I love you, then she feels as if you are slighting her. Again, this sounds like a normal relationship issue, unless it's a pattern. And if she is making you feel bad and making you feel guilty every time you feel like withholding that, then we have to look at the pattern, and does it also come with other components of emotional abuse? Because, I would get upset If my girlfriend left for the day and she decided not to kiss me and not to say I love you or anything, and she just walked out the door, I would be upset too. But that would be a moment in time. That would only happen very infrequently because, okay, yes, we had an argument, and of course this is going to happen. And of course, I'm understanding now she's still angry. And that makes sense. But what if I use that against her? What if I am waiting for times like this? What if I am purposefully upsetting her the day before so that when she leaves the next day and doesn't give me the kiss, doesn't give me the I love you, and walks out, I can now use that against her, even though I set it up. So this is something you have to watch out for, is that sometimes people will set up you being upset at them so they can use your upset against you. Just like you said, she uses your words against you, and I guarantee you she's using your emotions against you. Because when you say, I'm really angry that you did that, she'll say, what? You're angry? What about me? What about the times you did this to me? And then she'll redirect and make you focus on yourself, making sure that you're on the defense so she will never be. That's what emotional abusers often do, is that they will put you back on the defense. So you spend your time and energy trying to defend yourself, trying to explain things, when they set you up to do that. They're going to set you up to spend all your time focused on yourself, not them. And if you're focused on them, then they become exposed. They become vulnerable. They never, ever want to be vulnerable. Because if they are, that feels very, I already said exposed. It feels very a weak space for them. And they can't be weak. They have to stay in power. How do they stay in power? They stay in control. How do they stay in control? They find ways for you to focus on what you did wrong, and what you're doing wrong, and what you need to do better, and what you didn't do for them, and on and on. You just have no way to win. Like I said, there's no way. You can't get past it. So again, this is all bad news, and I haven't really given you a good response. I haven't even answered your question yet. Your question is, where can I find resources beyond the podcast of the language that I can use to help me stay on point, acknowledge what I'm feeling, and then act out of my values? Well, I'm sorry to say that no matter what language you use, it won't matter. Because language is used against you. Your words are used against you. And the only way you can communicate with somebody like this, and the only way to get your needs met, to get a question answered, is to make sure that they're on the receptive answering side. And people like this usually aren't. They're not receptive. So you can have the best language in the world, and she won't be receptive to it. The only question that seems to get you somewhere, sometimes, because sometimes this question doesn't even work, is the one I already said, do you realize that what you're saying or doing is hurting me? Because if they said no, you would ask, well, now that you know, are you going to stop doing it? And you might get an argument. You might get someone who says, what? Me stop doing it? You're doing it to me. Now they've turned it around. The turnaround game, it's always there. In this in this level of abuse, it's always there. I'm going to turn it back around onto you. I'm going to put your focus back onto you. That's what you need to look for. You have to be very conscious of it happening. It's like if you ask that question or if you say something to them, listen closely to the moment they turn it around. And then, yes, you can try to turn it back around. No, I'm asking you. And then they're going to turn it around again. And you can play that game, but you will lose. It's not happy. It's not good news because people at this level of emotional abuse know how to win these arguments. It's not even an argument. It's just power over you. I'm going to keep my power over you. That's what they're thinking. How do I do that? I make sure that you are always on the defense. Always. When you put me on the defense, I've got objection handling techniques. I know how to handle anything that you throw at me because I'm just going to turn around and put it back on you. That is, unfortunately, a classic way to manipulate someone. You can manipulate anyone in the world using that tactic. I'm just going to throw it back at you, and you're going to have to defend yourself. For example, you think I'm cheating? I think you're cheating, and this is why. That's often used. The person getting blamed will turn the blame around and put the exact same behavior on them. In other words, if you blame them for cheating or lying, they're going to blame you for cheating or lying. It's the turnaround game. Remember the turnaround game. Because as soon as it's turned around, you have to be aware what's happening so that you don't get sucked into that defensive space. And explanation. You want to explain what's happening. Stay out of that space. If you really want to communicate with someone like this, you have to stay out of that defensive space. It still won't work. I'm sorry to say, because somebody at this level is going to know how to handle that. They're going to turn it right back around again. So let me at least give you one practical piece of advice that might help. It might work. And that is, when you become aware of the turnaround, I want you to stay calm. I want you to stay rational. And then I want you to say the following. Okay, we can absolutely talk about that. We can do that right now or later, but let's talk about what I asked you first. Just remember that. Okay, we can talk about that. Absolutely. But let's talk about what I asked you first. What do you have to say about that? It probably won't work, but what you're doing is you're aware of the turnaround and you're acknowledging, yes, okay, you brought that up. Let's talk about it. I'm happy to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about this. It probably won't work, unfortunately, but you can do this with people that aren't at that high level of emotional abuse, and it will work. I did this just the other day to someone. I was stating my point, and this person fired back at me and says, well, what about you when you did this? You're not so innocent either. And when this person said that, I was like, oh, here it comes. I teach this stuff and I see it coming. I didn't expect it, but when it happened, I was conscious. I stayed cognizant. I stayed aware that the turnaround was happening. Remember that, the turnaround. When's the turnaround happening? Because once you catch it, oh, the turnaround, you can say that in your head. I'm going to acknowledge that. Oh, you want to talk about that? That's great. We can absolutely talk about that. Let's do that after we talk about this. So we'll talk about what I asked you first, and then we'll talk about that. Now with this person, that question was valid and it worked. That question caused them to go back inward and realize, oh, wait, I can't use the turnaround. They didn't use that language, I'm sure. I can't put them on the defense. I actually have to address this thing that I'm now talking about, that I'm now standing up for. I want to be right about this. So yeah, we have to continue talking about this. And it actually calmed the situation down. It's not always going to do that for sure, but with some people it might, because I acknowledged it. I validated that this person had something to say about, whatever they were holding on to. They just brought it up out of the blue from maybe 5 years ago. I did something and they brought it up. I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. That's great. Let's get it out in the open. And I want to talk about this too. So you first. That might help. But with a person that's at that high level of manipulation and emotional abuse, what's going to happen when you ask that question is that they're going to feel attacked. And because they feel attacked, they're going to find a different way to bring it back on you. And there are some emotional abusers that will talk and 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 continue talking so that you have to listen. And if you try to interrupt or interject, they're going to keep talking over you. You have to listen. You have to listen as they keep talking, because eventually you're going to want to get out of that conversation. And the only way out is submission. And this is also another strategy. So you may or may not run into that. But if that happens where the emotional abuser is feeling like, uh-oh, they're onto me, they're going to feel that as an attack because they're in survival mode. They're in insecurity mode. They're in fear, because typically why people abuse other people is they're in some sort of fear. If I don't get what I want, I have to hurt someone to get what I want. And when they're in that fear state, they never want to feel any more fear. They never want to feel vulnerable or hurt or exposed. So they come up with very powerful, effective ways to put you in your place and put you on the defense and cause you to refocus on yourself. and then you're spending all your time explaining and defending, and it goes nowhere because now you've lost your power. So look for the turnaround, acknowledge, say, okay, let's talk about that. We can absolutely talk about that. Just answer my question first, and then we'll go right to that. Be willing to acknowledge what they're saying. They may be just making stuff up, but that's fine. As long as we get them to answer the question that we pose to them or talk about the subject matter that we want them to talk about. Let's talk about that. That's great. And what about what I asked you? And if they start to turn it around again and they don't even want to talk about what they did, then you probably don't have a chance. There's just no way to win that kind of argument. Even if it's not about winning, it's about getting your point across. It's about having your words heard, having your feelings validated. None of that will happen with this level of abuse. And the reason I give you all this bad news is so you have hard knowledge to use for your next decision, whatever that is. At least you have hard knowledge. At least you won't hear this and go, well, Paul has given me a loophole here, and that is that there is a possibility that they could change their mind. I don't want you to be in that space. I just want you to know the facts. When you know the facts, you can make decisions based on facts. Emotional abuse often creates crazy thoughts and a crazy mindset, and you're confused a lot, and you're not sure which way is up. But when you have the facts, then you make decisions from that place. It's a much more confident place inside of you. That way, you can stand up for yourself and say, you know what? I know the facts. This is how it is. Or you can tell yourself, this isn't worth fighting about. I don't really want to be with this person. I'm going to leave this person. Whatever it is for you. I don't really promote leaving or staying on this show. I just give you the facts. I give you the information so that you can make sound decisions. Decisions that are good and healthy for you and those you love. And I've said it before, leaving someone who is that abusive is also a gift. So if you do decide to leave, it's a gift to them. It really is, because you're not there to abuse anymore. And if they can't access that behavior because they don't have a victim for that behavior, it allows them to get out of their survival mode, to get out of the fear and insecurity that they're in that causes the abusive behavior in the first place, and think more clearly. It doesn't mean they'll change, but it gives them an opportunity to think clearly and maybe come to the conclusion that perhaps they need some help. Perhaps they need to think about what they do that causes people to be upset with them or upset around them. It gives them the opportunity to heal. So, not everyone's ready to leave the relationship, and every relationship's different. And there are a lot of things to think about when you leave. And if there's children, there's that to think about. And if one person is controlling the money, there's that to think about. That's why you need an exit plan or escape strategy. You just have to prepare for this kind of stuff. And of course, if the person's violent or dangerous, then a whole other set of steps applies. You just have to plan everything accordingly. So let me just finish up with the person who wrote this message. He did write back a couple of things, and I'm going to answer those as well. He said, I just sent you an email recently, and I want to clarify to really get your insight on this. The issue that drives me most crazy is whenever I say that I'm hurt or upset or frustrated by something she's doing, she instantly spins it back on me, the very thing that I'm doing to her. So I actually already addressed this. So I didn't realize that I already addressed this. So this is the turnaround part. She will then distort all kinds of examples to prove that, which leaves me spinning and reeling in defense. So there's a good example of what happens, is that not only is this person turning it around on him, but she's distorting the facts. If she distorts enough facts, where does it put you? Let's just say that we're in an argument together and I distort all these facts, and now what does it leave you doing? Like, for example, you borrowed my truck and you used a quarter tank of gas. And then you come back and I say, you took my truck and now I see a scratch on the side and now there's 3/4 of a tank of gas that's gone and it smells in there. And I'm just putting in all these extra details that aren't true. Where does it put you? I mean, really try this on. I just fed back to you all this false information sprinkled with a little bit of truth. Where it puts you at least when I try this on, is having to explain every single distortion, every single untruth back. And that leaves you in defense and explanation mode. And when you're in that state, they can distort any amount of information they want and put you back in explanation mode, and even go as far as to say, no, that's not true. It was 3/4 of a tank of gas. Even though you're saying, no, it was only 1/4 of a tank of gas. How could I possibly use a 3/4 of a tank of gas when I only traveled 20 miles? It's just not valid. And then the emotional abuser might go, how do I know you traveled 20 miles? You told me you traveled 20 miles, but maybe you went 60 miles. And now where does that put you? Back on the defense. 60 miles? I didn't even have time to drive 60 miles. I was back in an hour. On. And it's a ridiculous, pointless argument that doesn't go anywhere except putting you in the space of constantly trying to defend and tell them how they're wrong. But know this, they know that you're going to be stuck on the distortions and the untruths. They know it. They know that you're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to explain to them because you're thinking they got it wrong, but what they actually did was want to keep you explaining. If you're always trying to explain what happened or what they're getting wrong, all those little details, they stay out of the spotlight. So the person who wrote this, this is the technique, this is the tactic, this is the turnaround. And when you are aware of the turnaround, you know it's happening, then you may not have the same reaction to it. I'm hoping you don't. You can just go into your mind and say, oh, here's the turnaround. How curious, how interesting. I see how she's doing this now. I see what she does. It helps you think outside of your own head for a moment. Because when you're in that space, you want to tell her how they got it wrong and how they got the facts incorrect, and here's the truth. It just keeps you in that space, and that's how they keep their power. And so he wrote back one more thing that said, sorry, but one more important thing to add. After this is all done, she puts intense pressure on me to help her feel loved. And I don't get reciprocated until she calms down, even though I don't get the apology or understanding of my feelings met. Yes, I understand. It's all about her. It really comes back to, you need to please me and fulfill my needs on my terms. And if you don't, I will make sure you pay for it. How do you get through this? There's not much I can tell you on how to resolve this with words, except for the couple questions that I posed. And one more thing, and this is probably the closest thing I can give you to any sort of sound advice in this type of situation. Again, you're dealing with someone who knows how to turn everything around, keep the focus on you when it's all about bad stuff, and keep the focus on her when it's all about her receiving good stuff. And there's not much you can do with a person like that. So the only thing you can do is, and this probably isn't going to work, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is stand your ground in certain circumstances. Now, this means a couple things. When, for example, she doesn't want to say I love you and she doesn't want to kiss you, doesn't want to reciprocate, you can stand your ground, or I should really say honor yourself, in that moment. Don't wait. Address it in the moment, which could go badly, I know. But you address it not from an angry space, from a wise space. What I mean by that is, why don't you want to kiss me back? I mean, a simple question like that. We probably know what's going to happen when you ask that question. But what it does is it forces her, or the person doing it, if somebody's listening and they can relate to this, it forces them to break the pattern of the building control that might be going on. Because by her withholding and not reciprocating, she wants you to feel a certain way. And she wants you to carry that feeling with you wherever you go to work or wherever. And as long as you're feeling bad, she keeps her power. And, I'm making some assumptions. I understand, because there's a lot that might be going on in your relationship that I don't know about. But typically, this kind of behavior, the withholding and the not reciprocating, is a way for you to feel bad. This might make her feel in power, keeping control over you, so that when you finally break down, or when she's finally ready, or when she realizes that you have been controlled enough, you've learned your lesson, so to speak, then she'll allow connection, or she'll reciprocate, like you say. So if this is a planned thing, whether she does it consciously or unconsciously, if she's doing this as part of a way to control you, then how do we interrupt that control? We ask why they're doing it. We don't say, why are you controlling? We ask, why don't you want to kiss me back? Why don't you want to say I love you when I say I love you to you? It's a simple question. And if you've had trouble asking her these simple questions because it got turned around on you, you probably won't get an answer. But it's a valid relationship question. And you could even follow it up with, when you don't kiss me, it makes me think you don't love me. And she might say, I don't love you. What I get from you is that you don't love me, and this is why. There's the turnaround. And then at that point you can say, all right, you know what? We can talk about that, but let's talk about this first, and then we'll talk about that. You stay in control. Controlling people don't like when somebody else controls, that's for sure. If you stay in control, however, you might be able to get a response. And this is where you might have to stand your ground. No, I'm not leaving until you tell me why you don't say you love me. I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to call into work right now and tell them. And that might work. Maybe 0.01% chance that works. But most likely that probably won't work. The person who wrote had a mean score that was way up there in the top tier, class D manipulation. And that is probably not going to work for you, because she's going to turn it around. And then she's going to find anything she can. She knows all your buttons. She knows all your triggers. She's going to find anything she can to bring it back to you and make you focus on yourself. And as soon as you fall for it, you lost. The game's over. So again, like I said, not a lot of good news in this episode, but I hope it gives you some direction of what you can do, staying very conscious, staying very present about what's happening. And when you are with someone, that you can actually stand your ground and honor yourself and say, you know what? I really want to know this. Tell me. And they want to turn it around and you say, okay, well, let's talk about that too. But tell me, when you can do all this, I believe there might be a chance. If you actually are able to talk, there might be a chance. But she has to have empathy. You have to test that theory. Do you know you're hurting me? And if she says, yes, I do, then maybe she doesn't have empathy, or maybe she's not going to access it. Maybe she doesn't care. And you just have to find this stuff out, because a lot of victims of emotional abuse, they don't know the truth. This is why you have to ask for the truth. And you often don't get it. But a question like that, do you know you're hurting me? You find out. And if they don't tell you, or they don't want to tell you, then they're trying to avoid that and put you back on the defense. And there's nothing you can do. Not pleasant. I know you're going through some tough stuff. Definitely read the rest of the workbook, the person who wrote the email, and it'll give you some more information, more data, more ways to detect what's happening in the moment, so that you don't get stuck on the other side in the powerless position. Because when you're powerless, you are on the defense all the time. You're always trying to explain to them what they're doing wrong or what is wrong. And they just continue to make you to blame, to be responsible, to feel guilty. And it just doesn't go anywhere. And that's, it's a sad place to be. I understand. But you're armed with knowledge. And the direct answer to your question about where you can find resources beyond this podcast, about the language you can use to help you stay on point and acknowledge what you're feeling, the best one I can give you is my other one, The Overwhelmed Brain, that helps you increase your self-worth and your self-esteem, build your confidence, and get into alignment with your values, and figure out what your values are, and honor yourself and be authentic. Everything that you just asked in that last question was everything I talk about on my other show. And you can go to theoverwhelmedbrain.com and look up values and look up boundaries and look up self-esteem and self-worth, all in the search field there. And you're going to find episodes that will help you connect with yourself. Because when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't have empathy for you or doesn't seem to care about you, doesn't care if you're hurting or not, then it's vital that you go inward and work on that self-esteem, work on that self-worth, come back to a place of actually trusting in yourself and knowing that you are worthy, you are significant, and that you deserve to be treated well. You deserve it. And, I don't know how you behave. The person who wrote to me, I don't know how you behave. I don't know what things that you do in a relationship. All you told me was her side and some of the things that you're experiencing. And I can only assume that you're trying your best. I can only assume that you're compassionate, you're kind, and you're caring, and you're generous, and you're empathetic. Because if you are all of those things and you're suffering in this type of relationship, then everything I said today applies. So what I mean is I don't know both sides of the story, and certainly take what I said today and do anything you want with it. Just know that in general, what I talk about is what happens typically in an emotionally abusive relationship. Tough stuff, I know. Thank you so much for writing. I appreciate you. Please share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships containing a 200-point checklist that helps you not only pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, but it also clearly reveals to you why you leave so many interactions feeling bad. You can purchase and download the workbook at loveandabuse.com. Not all emotionally abusive relationships have to end. Some can heal and grow from the challenges, and some can't. It takes both people willing to be honest and work on themselves, knowing that they both play a role in what's happening. If you're the only one working on the relationship, then you probably already feel alone. But know this show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you are not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.